The meaning of change. Senator Goldwater says he offers the people a change in government policies. President Johnson agrees, but says it is reckless to offer change, that change may lead to war. Goldwater replies that our major wars in this century occurred during Democrat administrations and that we need change to avoid another war. A change in foreign policy, which Goldwater promises and Johnson fears, must necessarily hinge on continuation or rejection of our present relationship with the Soviet Union, a relationship which is based on the Phoenix study of 1963. Another change? In the next 8 years, the Supreme Court will become a court of Goldwater-appointed conservatives or a court of Johnson-appointed liberals. Change in control of political parties and change in activities of federal regulatory agencies also hinge on the 1964 presidential election. That is a summary of my report on the meaning of change. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Senator Barry Goldwater has said that his candidacy offers the American people a choice, not an echo. A reminder that when liberals control both parties, one party merely echoes the policies of the other. A promise that if elected, he will make a change in policies. President Johnson denounced Senator Goldwater for promising change, saying, "From 1798 to 1960, the choices for the American presidency have never meant changes in broad purposes. But this year there are reckless factions. They confront the American people and demand that you make a choice," end quote. President Johnson failed to mention that Franklin D. Roosevelt did effect a complete revolution in government policy during the first 100 days of the New Deal. But it is accurate to say that from the election of Roosevelt in 1932 to the nomination of Goldwater in 1964, Republican and Democrat presidential candidates gave the American people no opportunity for real change in government policies. President Johnson claims that change would be reckless and might lead to war. Senator Goldwater replies that our involvement in 3 major wars in this century occurred during Democrat administrations and says we need a change in policy to avoid another catastrophic involvement. But what would a real change mean? A real change in foreign policy would mean alteration of U.S.-USSR relationship because this is the dominant consideration in foreign affairs. To discover what our present policy toward the Soviets is, we must turn to an obscure 141-page document called the Phoenix Study. The study was begun in the early days of the Kennedy administration. It was conducted at taxpayers' expense for the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, completed in July 1963, when 300 copies were quietly distributed to key personnel in government, including members of the U.S. team then negotiating the test ban treaty in Moscow. The American public heard nothing about the Phoenix Study until November 1963, when U.S. News and World Report published an article about it, saying that it laid down a new policy of friendly togetherness with the Soviets, recommending action by the United States to help the Soviets in the hope that the Soviets would soften and permit such close collaboration that the U.S. and the USSR would become dependent on each other. U.S. News and World Report presented convincing evidence that the Kennedy administration was following the Phoenix Study's policy of togetherness and interdependence with the Soviet Union. 4 complete issues of USA magazine devoted to this subject confirmed that the Kennedy administration had closely followed, and that the Johnson administration still followed, policy outlined in the Phoenix Study. U.S. Representative Leonard P. Lipscomb of California, after an extensive review of the Phoenix Study, said its policy of interdependence and togetherness with the Soviets amounts to feeding communism with one hand while fighting it with another. Here, in essence, are a few of the Phoenix Study policy recommendations. The United States should begin disarmament immediately without even an informal commitment from the Soviets. Presumably, this would encourage them to disarm. The President should encourage disarmament of the United States by advocating a tax cut. Americans might not approve tax reduction for disarmament, so the President should lead the people to believe economy is the objective. With the Soviets, however, the President should be honest, letting them know that he cuts taxes to reduce defense spending. The United States should help the Soviet Union catch up with us economically, industrially, and agriculturally, because, presumably, when the Soviets no longer envy or fear our superiority, tensions will ease. the United States should restrain its allies from starting conflicts, hopeful that the Soviets would reciprocate. The President should seek tacit agreements with the Soviets about disarmament, restraint of allies, interdependence, that should not bind them with open, formal agreements. The reason, apparently, if formal agreements are made and Soviet leaders welch, the U.S. would lose face unless it took an anti-Soviet position and denounced communist treachery. This would create more tensions and impair the policy of friendly togetherness. If Soviet leaders are not required to make specific commitments, and if the world knows nothing about their tacit agreements, the President will not be forced to denounce the Soviets and thus to create tensions. Quote, the United States should accept the need for a dual policy of collaboration and conflict as a significant improvement over unmitigated conflict, end quote. Now, as I read it, this recommendation in the Phoenix study means that we should continue the policy of giving direct aid to communist countries and of collaborating with them in any other way possible, while at the same time accepting the policy of fighting limited wars against communism, as in Korea, Laos, and Vietnam. I feel there's even a hint here that such limited wars might be arranged to keep the world aware of the danger of all-out war, conditioned to question nothing which Moscow and Washington may do to achieve relaxation of tensions. Neither President Johnson nor Senator Goldwater has mentioned the Phoenix study in campaign speeches. Yet it seems obvious that the change that Senator Goldwater promises and President Johnson fears must hinge on continuation or rejection of this policy of togetherness and interdependence with the Soviet Union. Controversial questions about the Supreme Court are deeply involved in the 1964 presidential election, too. Senator Goldwater has denounced the Supreme Court for the exercise of raw and naked power, saying the court violates the constitutional principle of limited government and has produced a breakdown in liberty. The present Supreme Court is basically an Eisenhower court, 4 of the justices having been appointed by Eisenhower, 2 by Kennedy, 1 by Truman, 2 by Roosevelt. President Johnson has appointed no Supreme Court justice, and he too is said to be discontented with the court. It is obvious that the Supreme Court will change in the next 8 years. The direction of change will depend on who is elected president in 1964. If Goldwater is president, it can be presumed he will fill vacancies with conservatives who share his view that the federal government must be limited to performing only constitutionally sanctioned tasks. If Johnson is president, he will appoint liberals who share his view that government must have broad power to do anything which the president and a majority of Congress deem proper. Another profoundly important change hinging on the 1964 presidential election is change in control of the political parties. It seems apparent that liberal Republicans want Goldwater to lose the election so that party leadership will revert to the Eastern establishment, the invisible government, under the banner of Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton. In the Democrat Party, a powerful Kennedy faction appears to have long-range plans for taking party control away from Johnson in 1968. A Johnson victory in 1964 could help sweep into the Senate 3 Kennedy men from 3 populous states: Robert F. Kennedy from New York, Pierre Salinger from California, Edward M. Kennedy from Massachusetts. In another populous state, Illinois, a Kennedy man, a brother-in-law of the Kennedys, Sergeant Shriver, already has great power in the Democrat Party. Shriver is director of the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations and is close to Adlai Stevenson, former governor of Illinois. As head of the poverty program, Shriver will have opportunity to enlarge his political influence in Illinois. Thus, if President Johnson wins in 1964, his victory could put 4 hardcore Kennedy men in control of Democrat Party machinery in 4 key states: New York, California, Illinois, Massachusetts. And by 1968, the Kennedy faction might have enough power to wrest party control from its old rival, Lyndon B. Johnson. Another important change hinging on the 1964 presidential election involves activities of the federal regulatory agencies, like the Federal Communications Commission. Goldwater supporters allege and present persuasive evidence to support their allegations that the FCC, in enforcing its fairness doctrine, greatly exceeds its congressional grants of power and that the Democratic National Committee is actually using the FCC as a weapon to harass from the airways all broadcasts sharply critical of the basic government policies which Goldwater promises to change. If Goldwater becomes president, his conservative principle that all activities of all agencies of government should be limited to the exact specifications of law and of the Constitution could sharply curtail the power of all such agencies as the Federal Communications Commission. If Johnson is elected, the regulatory agencies will no doubt continue to operate on the liberal theory that government must not be bound by exact and rigid rules, but must have indefinite power to do whatever officials deem proper and necessary. In 1964, for the first time in this generation, as President Johnson and Senator Goldwater agree, the people in electing a president are confronted with the question of whether they want a change. The people should consider very seriously the implications of this election. Study carefully the policies that exist, the quality of the Supreme Court, the activities of the regulatory agencies, the foreign policy, the domestic policies of the federal government. Decide in their own hearts and minds whether they are content with these policies, whether they agree with President Johnson that we must continue the policies as are, or whether they agree with Senator Goldwater that there must be a change in the basic policies of government. That is the decision for the people in 1964. Goodbye. God bless you. For the documented text of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 474, The Meaning of Change. 6 copies, $1.